Today we're going to be talking about the Assassin's Creed series kind of as an aggregate. And there's something I want to talk about basically right off the bat here, really to get the point across as soon as I can. Um, well, let me start by saying that there's a rule I'm going to place upon several of the video series I'm going to be doing shortly here. Those include the Assassin's Creed series and the Kingdom Hearts series, okay? I'm going to describe the rule right now, in summary, and the consequences for violating that rule, and some of the things I'm going to do about that. No spoilers in the comments, okay? Seriously. No spoilers in the comments. I don't care if you put spoilers in big caps, whatever. If you put any spoilers in any of my comments, I will ban you. I will block you from my comments and from my channel, and you will not be able to look at these videos ever again. Now, and I mean this very sincerely, and I will get into the whys in a little bit. I just wanted to get that bullet point out first. I will be putting up posts, which I will link in the videos, on the thread, on the forums, in order for people to, if they actually want to discuss things openly about that, in ways that would be spoilerific, they can do so there. If you have a wish to ask me something specific that is spoilery and you don't want to join the forums, which I understand, you could feel free to send me a message. There are other options here, is what I'm saying. Now, let's take a couple steps back from that point and talk about the types of series there are, okay? In general, every given franchise, every given series, from regardless of media, and this is true for video games as well, can be categorized in one of four different groups, alright? There's direct serials, procedurals, and extreme procedurals, okay? Now, only one of these terms is an actual term, if you understand what I mean. The other three are ones that I've been using for several years myself. Those of you out there who actually know the term procedural probably understand the fact that it doesn't quite apply in this case, even though it could be seen to. Periodical would be another term that does technically apply, even though it doesn't actually apply, if you understand my meaning. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The base difference between the two sides, the two types of serials and the two types of procedurals, is these have an ongoing overall story and a great deal of continuity between the two, between any given episode, game, whatever, and these do not. Now I'm going to give you some examples as we go here, because I want to actually discuss this in full. This is something I've been waiting to discuss for some time now, and I was waiting for either the Kingdom Hearts or the Assassin's Creed series to go into, because these two series are the most, two of the most extreme examples I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start over on this side, okay? The furthest kind of procedural, an extreme procedural, is something where there is effectively an absolute lack of continuity or canon or common element other than some most basic things that could be construed as themes between the games, TV shows, etc. The Star Trek The Original Series would be a good example of this. While there is some degree of continuity, some degree of establishment of the setting, it was almost never direct, if you understand what I mean. A better example within games would be the Final Fantasy series at certain periods of its history. This is not counting the attempt they started to make later on to actually tie the series in together, which would move this into just a plain old procedural series. And this is also not counting the most recent stuff, which I'm not even going to talk about. My point is, using the old Final Fantasies before their attempt is probably the best way to put that. FF1 and FF2 had nothing to do with each other. FF2 and FF3 had nothing to do with each other. FF3 and FF4, nothing. You get where I'm going with here. From game to game or episode to episode, it's just another game in the series. And there are common themes. There are in the case of a TV show, there's common actors, for example. But overall, what you are getting is something new. That is a procedural, and there are some people who prefer that storytelling style. I myself have gone out on more than one occasion at saying that I prefer a serial type of storytelling style. That's simply my preference. I'm not saying the other kind is bad, obviously. I just named two examples of procedurals and extreme procedurals. Oh, two examples of extreme procedurals that I actually really enjoy. The FF series and the original series of Star Trek. Now, to move up a step, a plain old procedural is something that does have a degree of setting continuity, but not story or plot continuity. Star Trek The Next Generation is probably actually the best example of that I could come up with, bar none, because while there is continuity there, events that happen in previous episodes are brought up again, and things that are changed in the status quo are changed for the future, and they do reference other episodes on a fairly regular basis, almost none of that is actually part of any given arc. It's other than two-parters and stuff, it's almost never from episode to episode, that kind of a thing. there are a couple of arcs you could point to throughout the series, but even those don't actually count by this definition. The Q arc, if you want to call it that, for example, where he shows up about once a season, give or take, that doesn't count for this kind of thing. That doesn't make the series a serial. It simply makes it makes it a standard procedural because it does have self-consistent continuity, right? Now let's move up to serial. Um, well, actually, let's stay back in procedural for just a second, because I was going to think of oh, right. I did think of a video game series that would work in this. The Mother/Earthbound series, which is only 3 games long, but it still works rather well because, again, each of the 3 games isn't really directly tied with the rest, aside from a few major arcs and themes and things like that. And there is nevertheless some self-consistent continuity between all 3 games. But for the most part, it is a game and then a game and then a game, all of which happen to be in the same setting with some ties to each other rather than, the examples I'll be getting into. So we move up to serials. Serials are obvious. Serial is the only term I'm using here that is an actual term. Again, using television as an easiest example, Babylon 5 is very much a serial show. Farscape was a serial show. The new Battlestar Galactica was a serial show. Parts of Deep Space Nine were serial show. That kind of a thing. Serial is something that has defined story arcs. I'm sorry, what I like to call plot arcs, which is to say one step up from story. Something that crosses seasons or whatnot. It's very much connected. It's not completely connected because every single example I just gave does have bottle show episodes. They do have the occasional thing where it's while the overarching arc may have something to do with the background or the setting, it's not something that's specifically addressed in any given episode, that kind of thing. In other words, it's something where if I was to tell you about any random episode from season 2, while it might contain spoilers, the odds are it probably won't, relatively speaking, especially if I speak in vague enough terms. If you follow my thought logic here, serials often have things such as character development, characters actually growing and changing during the course of a season or the course of a game, or some degree of changes in the status quo, things that actually move. Excuse me. Oh my. I have no idea what that was. Wow. We'll have changes in the overall setting and the overall history. It's the concept of the fact that you're watching or playing history in action is something that serials tend to embody. I've actually had a great deal of difficulty coming up with video games that really embody this, but my favorite example I've come up with is actually the Mega Man X series, which is all very much with a couple of it's pretty much one defined plot arc. It does have a few games that go off and do other side things, and there are other plots and other encouragements there, but overall it is one contiguous series, right? Then we move up to direct serials. Now, direct serials, I actually can only think of one example of in television, and I'll get to that in just a moment. A direct serial is most defined by 2 qualities, okay? The first quality helps define the second. That is that it is a direct sequel. In general, any given episode or any future game happens more or less, for all intents and purposes, immediately after the following one, if you follow me. There is one storyline. While there may be side storylines, the overall storyline is absolutely the focus, unlike the previous examples where they will do bottle shows, where they'll go do other things. No. There is one story that's being told here that is absolutely dominant, and any others... Excuse me. Any other stories are secondary to that, right? And again, that direct sequel concept. And the second point, and this is the most important point and why I mentioned that very first thing way back when I started this video, it is next to impossible to discuss any given episode or game within a direct serial without spoiling the previous, because of the nature of the storytelling. One of the comments that has been made about the Assassin's Creed series specifically is the fact that you literally can't play the first few minutes of any given one of the games without spoiling the big plot twists of the previous ones. Now, this is something of an artifact of their storytelling style, and I don't think that's actually a bad thing. Quite the contrary, I enjoy that a great deal. It's probably one of the reasons the Creed series and the Kingdom Hearts series both have been elevated in my mind, is because they are direct serials, and in fact, actually, basically the only games I can think of right off the top of my head right now, game series that I really enjoy that are direct serials like that. In television, to give you an example for those of you who have not played either of these, I can only give you one example, and it's actually only a single season of Star Trek Enterprise, Season 3, the Xindi arc. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, I don't have to explain anymore. But for those of you who don't, every given episode ended, and it wouldn't end like most television shows do, most Star Trek shows especially. Oh, everything's been resolved. No, it'll end like literally in midway through a given arc, and that arc will continue immediately to the next episode because the next episode takes place pretty much immediately after the previous one. It was one contiguous story. It was completely a direct serial. It's one of the reasons I enjoy season 3, and one of the reasons Enterprise is such a weird show to talk about, because I hate season 1 and 2 so much, and yet I love season 3 and 4 so much. It's so strange. But anyways, moving on. That second point I made is why I make that rule for these videos. That goes for this video as well, too. I will make a link to this on the comments, or within the comments to the forum if you want to actually talk about the series and talk about it with spoilers attached. But I mean this very sincerely. Let me explain some of my philosophy on this. The word spoilers is such an appropriate word in my mind because it comes from the word spoil. It is so easy for a story to be spoiled, to be made lessened, to be worsened in some way because you have learned something about it that you weren't supposed to learn at that point in time. It's one of the reasons I try so hard to avoid spoilers in certain games and certain some of these videos, is because it spoils it. Let me give you a direct example here. There is an event in Kingdom Hearts 1, I'm not going to speak of what it is here, that completely spoiled that particular game for me. I shouldn't. Now, obviously, I still enjoyed the game. Obviously, I still enjoy the game for that matter. But when the big twist happened, it was just like, yeah, okay, because I already knew it. There was no impact. There was no emotion. The scene was completely sapped of any dramatic potential because I already knew. And this is true in many instances of like circumstance. I could name several other games that were spoiled for me. Final Fantasy VII. And I'm going to name this specific example because if you don't know about this, then I don't know what rock you've been hiding under. Aerith's death, or Aeris's if you prefer. I knew about that well in advance, and even having it spoiled didn't. I still got the scene, but there was so little impact because I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming before I picked the game up because it was spoiled for me. Now, for many, many years, I have had a very hardline policy about this myself, and my family and my friends all know this. No spoilers, period. And we all have this kind of agreement with another. We know, okay, and if ever we're going to talk about something that is spoilerific, and we're not sure if the other person knows, we tend to preface the comment, have you finished blah yet, or have you gone through blah yet? And if they say no, we say, okay, never mind. And for example, a friend of mine very recently has started watching New Who, the new Doctor Who series, and we have all another friend of mine who has been showing it to her and myself have been extremely careful, basically not to discuss it at all around her, because we don't want to spoil it. We all have this unspoken agreement with each other: no spoilers. Now, in Assassin's Creed and Kingdom Hearts especially, as I said again, it is impossible to discuss these games without spoiling the previous ones. Impossible. So I'm probably going to put a little note in every single one of these videos reminding you of that, just in case someone happens to be curious, because there is no possible way to do that. I cannot discuss these games without spoiling the previous ones. Now, that being said, the reason for that rule is very simple. I want to make sure nobody out there is going to be like, oh, well, spoiler, 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 spoiler. It was a sled right there in the comments section, and any such comments will be deleted and those people will be blocked. I will not tolerate that in this case. I know I'm usually much more easygoing and much more tolerant of differing opinions and whatever you want to talk about, but this is a hard line. This is a line in the sand for me, okay? Now that I've gotten all that out of the way, finally, let's talk about the Assassin's Creed series as a series. I've already talked about the major point and one of the most unique points about it. One of the interesting facets, in addition to that, is the fact that the Creed series in general almost seems I'm trying to actually think of a good word and I'm failing. One of my friends once described it as an interesting premise, but ultimately unfulfilled. The point that they were making was that the series as a whole sounds like someone just went back and did a great deal of history, a great deal of study on history and on events within history, and just started affixing a certain aspects of a conspiracy, basically, to certain elements of it, right? And being like, well, this was caused by this, and this was caused by this. A very standard alternate history kind of idea, all things considered. Most people who do alternate histories will actively go and make that alternate history extremely similar to ours, just change the meanings behind certain things, right? And that's generally the approach that has been made here. And obviously, Assassin's Creed is very much an alternate Earth. There's absolutely no arguing that point. Um, the whole 2012 thing comes to mind immediately. But the point here being that I'm trying to think how to describe this. It's fascinating for someone like me who actually does know a great deal about history. I've always been good at and interested in history, and reading through the various events and reading about their interpretation and their reasoning behind why things happened is absolutely fascinating to me, and I do find that enjoyable. One of the other things about Assassin's Creed as a series, and I've mentioned this over in my Star Trek videos as well, is the fact that, well, you kind of have to accept some silly and ridiculous things in order to get to the good stuff, is basically what this concept is in a nutshell. There's a difference between, when you're discussing science in a fictional sense, there is soft science and hard science, okay? Now, obviously this is a scale, there's plenty of gray in between here, but the furthest of hard science is basically actual real science. This will actually work here in the real world, okay? Real physics, real math, that kind of thing. The furthest extent of soft science is effectively in there's no difference between this and pure fantasy. They're literally just making things up to make things up, right? There's no sense to be had. Most things in general that approach anything with a fictional science fiction element to them tend to try and go right about in the middle here. Some kind of lean this way, some kind of lean this way. Assassin's Creed is way over here, all things considered. The way they approach the whole Animus thing and the various tech that is perceived within this game, for all intents and purposes, you could view this game as a fantasy game as opposed to science fiction game, and the difference would be negligible at best. And so, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, by the way. Quite the contrary. If done properly, it can be done well. I've spoken well of this concept over on Star Trek as well. And once we have accepted this ridiculous premise of the Animus and the various things that happen within these series, we get to some awesome gameplay and some awesome storytelling. But it's interesting to me because it seems almost unnecessary, if that makes any sense. The Animus is effectively just, and Desmond himself for that matter, are effectively just framing devices, a means for us to approach the actual story, which is, the story of Altair, the story of Ezio, things like that, and Connor in the most recent game. And no, I don't know how to pronounce his real name, so forgive me. I actually looked it up and looked at it for a moment and said, I'm not going to bother. Anyways, their stories are interesting and engaging, and yes, it does have something to do with the modern age story, the story that's happening in the now, in the era which the Animus has. But ultimately, that story, while interesting, is nowhere near as interesting as the story of Ezio, as the story of Altair, stuff like that, at least in my opinion. And it makes me extremely curious, in its own way, as to why bothering, if that makes any sense. The point I'm trying to reach here is when you're designing something, when you're writing something, you have a degree of power and control and decision making that most people tend to forget. Just because you have initially started with this premise does not mean you have to finish with it. You can make it make sense without having that. So in other words, I wonder at what point did they decide the Animus and the modern story were essential, were required. I'm not against a framing device. I really am not. I just wonder why it was done, if that makes any sense, because so much of these games are the time spent in the Animus, and with everything else being an in-between. Now, with that being said, of the various games, I think, personally, that that would have been 1 and, I guess, 3. That is to say, Assassin's Creed 1 and Brotherhood here. God, that's hard to do with my... And Brotherhood here would be the games that I would personally say managed the modern era intervening breaks the best, because each one of those serviced the story, each one of those serviced the characters. We learned from it wasn't just there to take a pause in the story. Assassin's Creed 2 had a couple sections which are not really that memorable, in my opinion, which is interesting because, in my opinion, in general, having not completely finished Revelations yet, by the way, I'm in the middle of playing Revelations like right now, basically. I tend to think of as 2 as generally my favorite of the games, despite some other problems that 2 has, which I'll get to later. Now, there is one other thing, speaking of which, all this is just me talking, basically. I'm not casting judgment. It is just interesting to see the decisions they made while making this series. Now, personal... let's go ahead and just say the thing I was about to say, and then let's move on to the opinion topic here. I'm playing the Assassin's Creed series on the PC. Always have. That is because of Steam. Really, that's it in a nutshell. That is the reason. I like Steam. I like digital download as a medium preference, and I prefer to play games on the PC if I have the choice, because the PC is the easiest thing for me to game. If I want to play something on the PS3 or the Wii or any console really that isn't a handheld, I have to go and actually hook everything up and make sure it's because it's not hooked up by default because we got other things hooked up, and then okay, set this up and get this and sit down and play, and then I'll play, and then I have to unhook everything back up in order to that kind of a thing, right? Now that is a bit of a hassle, but also in my opinion, it's an unnecessary hassle if I have the option of playing it on the PC. Does that make any sense? I am not. No, let me make something absolutely clear. It just occurred to me you could be misunderstanding me. I am not saying PCs are superior to consoles. Let's not get into that, okay? If I haven't made it abundantly clear, yes, I play console games. I play a lot of console games. I have played console games for a long time. I am not saying console or PC are superior. I am saying that for me, where I am at right now, if a game series is coming out on the PC and the console, I will probably pick it up on the PC. There's a second reason for that, and that is the fact that it's easier to get it on sale in the PC. Steam sales. Enough said, really. I'm sorry, but this is real life, and I don't have infinite money. So even though I think a game might be worth $60, it's so much harder to actually justify that $60 for a game. Now, now that that's out of the way, I just wanted to make it clear to everyone that I'll be playing these games on the PC. That will be affecting my opinion on at least two of the games. In fact, I guarantee you that I'll be mentioning that with regards to 1 and 2 especially. And I might as well mention the reason for that now. Both 1 and 2 were very clearly designed for console controls. In fact, they played better when you hooked up a controller to it and played with that. Brotherhood was the first game that actually really worked well on the PC. Instead of having the action buttons up there for this does this and there's little icon, you have to figure out what the icons mean and stuff like that. It simply said left control or whatever you had bound it to. It was actually clearly designed to also be played on the PC with some degree of usefulness, and it was the one that played the best when I was actually using a keyboard, which is my preferred method of playing, admittedly, because, now, and I just mentioned that because it's interesting to me. While I call Assassin's Creed 2 generally my favorite, I have to admit that I had more fun playing Brotherhood and Revelations because those games play easier for me. And it's not just because the PC thing. Admittedly, there are conveniences. There are what did I call those? Um, Quality of life changes that just make the games more efficient and more enjoyable. While the story may not be as epic or grandiose in a good way, the fact of the matter is the gameplay has been polished. They've obviously moved up their game, so to speak. The jumping puzzles in Brotherhood, for example, are some of my favorite. The whole jumping little side missions and stuff like that. I absolutely love those, and the whole Leonardo side missions were absolutely astonishing. I enjoyed every single one of those. You get my general point here. Now, I again want to stress something. The mere fact that I'm looking at these games means I think they are at the bare minimum good. Obviously, you don't have to share my opinion on that. Duh. If you tell me, Arshian guy, you're a moron for thinking these games are acceptable, then you can go away because you're not really the kind of person I want here. If you are someone who is going to say, Arshian guy, I don't find these games to be good, and here's why, you are the kind of person I want to be here because you're actually discussing the issue. We're actually discussing it. And that brings me to my last point I'm going to make here. I know that both of these series that I'm going to be looking at pretty much back to back, Assassin's Creed and Kingdom Hearts, tend to be rather divisive amongst fans. I see very few people who have opinions on them. Some people love them, and some people hate them. If you hate these games and want to talk about that, as long as you are civil and obey my no spoilers rule, that is fine. I do, as always, encourage a diversity of opinion within my viewers. I will be trying to describe why I like these games and give my reasonings, and you are, of course, free to disagree with that as well. Like I said, let's just try and keep things civil here, okay? Now, interestingly enough, I bring that last point especially up because I've gotten the impression that the general opinion is that the Creed series has gone downhill over time. I find that interesting since, while I have again said that 2 is arguably probably my favorite, that is almost entirely for story reasons. As far as a game I enjoy playing, in my opinion, the series has been getting better with each game. Keeping in mind I have not played 3 yet. I cannot make any judgments about 3. not personal judgments anyway, somebody I know and whose gaming opinion I trust because his opinion and mine tend to mesh pretty much 99% of the time, says that he has enjoyed playing 3 extensively. He refused to talk about the story at all because of that whole spoilers thing I mentioned earlier, but he enjoys playing the game extensively. And so I have a feeling that whenever I do pick up 3, I'll probably enjoy it. But I can't speak to that. So again, I'm leaving 3 completely out of this because I know nothing about it personally. Let's see. Is there anything else I really wanted to discuss about the series? I don't think so. So I suppose that's it. Hopefully, I haven't gotten all of you with your pickaxes and torches and stuff like that, coming over and be like, "Rawr! Kill our Shanghai! How dare he?" Stuff like that. I guess I'll find out soon enough. I'll talk to you guys soon.